Hello, everyone. It's me, Sharon. Welcome back to Umang Systemic Functional Linguistics. In the last video, we discussed the rank scale, which is very important in text analysis using SFL. In this video, we will see how our knowledge about the rank scale can be applied in dividing a text into clauses, which is the first step in SFL text analysis. To this end, we are going to discuss what in SFL is called a clause boundary.
As usual, let's take a look at the outline first. So these are what this video will cover. First, we will have a brief revisit to the clause as a rank in the rank scale. Second, I will tell you what a clause boundary is. This is particularly important because, as you know, text analysis using SFL occurs at the clause level. Third, we will see the differences between finite and non-finite clauses, which are crucial to determining whether a clause is really functioning at a clause rank or below. Then we will consider some criteria for counting a clause separately for analysis. At the end of the video, you will be presented with a step-by-step example of how to divide a paragraph into clauses. All right, because there are many things to cover, let's begin.
I hope that you still remember the discussion of the clause as a rank in the rank scale. If you haven't watched the video, you need to watch it now. Just find the video titled Rank Scale in the playlist, okay? So, a clause is a grammatical unit of language that is made up of one or more groups or phrases. Do you still remember the difference between a clause simplex and a clause complex? In case you forgot, a clause simplex is a clause made up of one clause, like she revised her essay. Meanwhile, a clause complex is made up of more than one clause, like she revised her essay and submitted it to her lecturer. The next thing is what we call taxes, which are concerned with the ways clauses are joined to construct a clause complex. Just like the example I mentioned, we can join two clauses with equal status, like two main clauses. This is called parataxis. If the clause complex consists of two clauses with unequal status, like a main and a subordinate clause, it is called hypotaxis. All right, a clause complex is constructed for two purposes. The first purpose is to project the content of the main clause, like I believe that you will understand. In this example, the clause you will understand projects the content of the clause I believe. The second purpose is to expand the content of the main clause, whether by elaborating it, extending it, or enhancing it. You have been provided with some examples in the previous video, so I don't want to repeat the examples here, okay? Lastly, a clause can function in a lower rank, or what we call a rank-shifted clause. A rank-shifted clause may function as a qualifier of a nominal group, a circumstantial element in the clause, and so forth. What you need to understand is that a rank-shifted clause is not counted as a separate clause, but as an embedded clause. This means that an embedded clause is part of a clause, treated as a group instead of a clause, okay? Let's continue.
When we want to analyze a long text using SFL, like a paragraph or an essay, we need to divide the text into clauses. To do so, we must be able to identify where a clause begins and finishes. That is what the clause boundary is. It is where one clause begins, finishes, and another clause begins. At a glance, it seems easy, right? In fact, it is not easy, especially when the text contains many rank-shifted or embedded clauses. Moreover, the way SFL sees clauses is quite different from traditional grammar. Traditionally, we understand a clause as having a subject and at least a verb, right? If so, how about verbless clauses or minor clauses? How about non-finite clauses without a subject, like using AI tools in education? We will see this in practice, okay? We also need to understand why SFL analyzes texts at a clause level. Well, the reason is that SFL is also developed to analyze spoken text. Spoken text does not have a structure like written text, where punctuation may help us divide sentences. In spoken text, there is no such thing as a sentence or punctuation, right? So that's why SFL works at a clause level, because a clause is there in both spoken and written texts. The next thing is this. Clause boundary applies to all metafunctional analyses. I know we haven't reached that point yet, but I want you to know that all metafunctional analyses occur at the clause level. It means that the same clause will be analyzed at least 3 times, assuming that the clause is analyzed using the transitivity system, the mood system, and the theme-reme system, okay? The last thing to say here is that a clause is typically marked by a verbal group. If you still remember, the head of a clause is a verbal group, of course, except for verbless clauses. So, in identifying a clause boundary, you will need to pay attention to the verbal groups in the text. Then, you will determine whether each verbal group is part of a clause or a rank-shifted clause functioning in a particular group. You will see a few examples in the next slide.
All right. The verbal group in a clause can either be finite or non-finite. In turn, the verbal group determines whether a clause is finite or a non-finite clause. Just to help you remember, a finite verb is influenced by tense and number. What I mean by number is whether the subject is first person, second person, third person, and so forth. Meanwhile, a non-finite verb is not influenced by tense and number. Let's take a look at the examples. A, all underlined words are verbs. You can see that the verbs are either in the past or present tense, right? Their forms are also influenced by the number. Now, examples B are non-finite verbs. There are 3 types of non-finite verbs. The first example shows what we call a to infinitive, in which the verb begins with the word to. The second example shows what we call a bare infinitive, in which the verb does not begin with the word to. Meanwhile, the rest examples show what we call gerund infinitive, that is, the verb in the present participle form. These non-finite verbs form non-finite clauses and are often confusing in terms of clause boundaries. For instance, in the third example, the non-finite verb using is part of the clause using AI tools in education, and this non-finite clause functions as the subject of the whole clause. In the fourth example, the same non-finite clause functions as the qualifier of the nominal group students, becoming part of the subject. But this is limited not to non-finite clauses. If you look at the last example in examples A, the finite clause, who lives next door, is also part of the subject, the man. In other words, the clause functions at a lower rank. Now, I assume that you can identify finite and non-finite clauses and whether each clause functions at a clause rank level or at a lower rank. Let's continue.
When you analyze a text in using SFL, you need to divide the text into clauses and number them. This is often challenging because some clauses need to be counted separately, like Clause 1, Clause 2, and so on, while some other clauses are embedded. So these are 2 basic criteria to use, okay? First, if it is a full clause or a clause based on its rank, count it. This means that clauses functioning at a lower rank, like a qualifier or complement of a clause, are embedded. They are not counted separately, okay? To mark that a clause is an embedded clause, you will use double brackets. Second, each clause in a clause complex is counted separately. This applies to both paratactic and hypotactic clause complexes. Well, we need a real practice of how to identify clause boundaries, right? Because without looking at how all of these stuffs work, no one will be able to do it. So, in the next section, Numong will demonstrate how to do this.
Alright, so now we will divide this paragraph into clauses, and this is an AI generated paragraph by the way. The first step is to divide this paragraph into sentences. So I think this will be easy because this is an example of written text. We put one here, okay, like this, but maybe we need to separate this, okay. Then okay, the second, the third, mm, mm, alright. So as you can see, there are 5 sentences, and now we need to identify the verbal groups in each sentence. So every verb or verbal groups in each sentence will be highlighted, and I will pause the video, and when all the verbal clauses are identified, I will uh, resume the video again. So like this, when students who study is a verbal group or a verb, and then I will highlight like this. Okay. Okay, so all verbs or verbal groups have been highlighted, as you can see here. Now the third step is to identify rank shifted or embedded clauses based on the identified verbal groups in step 2. Okay, so if you look at here study, for example, so the verb study here actually is a qualifier that adds information to many students who study academic writing. Okay, so this verbal group or this verb belongs to this noun, belongs to the subject. Okay, so we will add a double bracket like this. Okay, so or maybe this. Okay, so this is an embedded clause, and the clause uh, has the main verb use. Okay, what about to improve? Okay, to improve, or this verbal group belongs to use or as complement of the verb use. So we'll bracket this like this. Okay, Then, and some of them rely here is the main verbal group of the second clause. Okay. Meanwhile, the modal verb should here is a comparative qualifier. Comparative qualifier that explains the use of these tools. Okay. So basically, the first sentence has two clauses. So we separate the clause. Okay, like this. Alright, then we can continue to this one. Because they believe that feedback provided by AI, okay, because they believe is a hypothetical clause complex, okay, dependent clause. Because that the feedback provided by AI is the content of belief, so we bracket it like this, okay. So the verb provided belongs to the verb belief, the content of belief, okay. Is this verb is the main verb, okay, the main verb of the first clause, and the first clause begins at this point and at this point, so we can uh, separate the clauses like this. They often accept the suggestion without considering, okay, suggestion, and without considering here is what we call it, the circumstance, okay, the circumstance of manner, and should be separated. Okay, we separate like this without considering, and while the verb improve, which is part of this embedded clause, is a content of the consideration. So without considering, and the consideration has the content this. Okay. Oops. Okay. And the next one. What makes the situation more complex? The verb makes is part of this one. Okay. So the content of what is this makes the situation more complex. It is part of the subject. So this actually a subject clause, and this is the verb. Okay, this is the verbal group, the main verbal group. The teachers remind them, and so forth is actually the qualifier of the teacher. And like this. So there is only one clause at the clause level or the clause rank in sentence sentence 6. Okay, not sentence 6, but now it has become clause 6. When students who are familiar, okay, this one, the verb are here explains or describes the student, so it becomes a part of the clause, the subject clause. Okay, and while the main verbal clause, the verbal group of this clause is the prefix. Okay, and this one using feedback is a circumstance. Okay, and okay, this sentence is a clause complex. Okay, the main clause is here, while the second clause or the subordinated clause is here. So as you have seen in the previous slide, that each clause in a clause complex are counted as a separate clause. So we can divide them like this. Okay, then while that they did not recognize before is an embedded clause. Why? Because did not recognize is part of this clause, and this clause is the content or is a qualifier of errors. Okay, so the patterns of error is a nominal group, and this embedded clause is a qualifier. And then the last one student said, okay, one student is a subject, so said uh, is the main verbal group of the clause. And while she became more aware that she had often ignored after receiving blah 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 is the content of the say. So we can put it like this. But as you can see, uh, this embedded clause has embedded clause within it, embedded clauses. For example, the grammar rules that she had often ignored after receiving automated feedback that highlighted her mistakes. You can see these clauses like this. This part that she had often ignored after receiving automated feedback is the qualifier of the grammar rules. Okay, okay, like that. After receiving automated feedback is a circumstance of or the what we call it, the prepositional phrase, not prepositional phrase, but the circumstantial element, the clause. Yes, it has a preposition after here, but because after this preposition it is not a nominal group but a verbal group, so it is a circumstantial element of the clause, which indicates the time. Okay, so we can um, put put it inside the double brackets here. and that highlighted the her mistakes is a qualifier of the nominal group automated feedback. So there are multiple embedded clause inside the clause 9, but you can also mm, divide them into different clauses. But I think for the time being, this is enough. Okay, so now we can adjust the other clauses. I mean the embedded clause, like in here, okay, this we can put it into double brackets because they are part of the embedded clause. I mean like this. AI should only support their learning and not replace their thinking is the content of the product glossary mind, okay, the complement of the mind. Okay, using feedback generated by AI, actually generated by AI, is what we call the qualifier for the nominal group feedback. Okay, and I think that's it. If you notice a few missing parts, you can put your comment below. Okay, I think that's enough. I hope this is useful. Oh yeah, I forgot. Sorry, the bonus. How to convert them into tables for metafunctional analysis. Okay, so I will give you an example one. Then let's say that you want to put them into table. We should clean it first. Put it right in. Let's say this is the subject, this is the verb, and then alright. And now you select, go to table, convert text to table, set out the fit to contents, set the separator, and then okay, like this. Okay, so here you can add, for example, participant, okay, and then this is a process, and this is uh, well, go. Okay, that's how you convert the clauses the text into tables. Alright, I think enough. And if you have questions, just let me know in comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.